Yes. The College Football Playoff Committee got it so very wrong. Shocking. I know. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. BS, like total BS, by the way. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. The College Football Playoff Committee completely drops the ball once again. Surprise! We're also going to talk about the biggest threat to steal the Big 12 title away from BYU. And will BYU lose a game the rest of the way? Who can spoil this season for the Cougars, or are they truly a team of destiny? If you hit subscribe, I get to keep my job. I don't know, man. Penn State's lost a game. Ohio State's lost a game. Texas has lost a game. They are all ranked above BYU. And you could make the case that BYU deserves to be above all of them. They've done the thing where you win all the games in front of you and go undefeated. However, I don't know if tomorrow Ohio State and BYU played, if the Cougars would win. I get it. There are going to be some one-loss teams that grade better and maybe are better football teams. Leave them in front. I don't think anyone's mad about that. But why is Indiana at 5? Why is Indiana at 5? My first thought is, well, they must have, similar to BYU, won multiple games against top 25 teams, even a game against a top 15 team on the road. They must have won multiple games against bowl-eligible teams as well. No. Indiana's non-conference, Florida International, Western Illinois, Charlotte. BYU played, SMU, obviously, the top 15 team is cream of the crop. They also played a top-ranked team at the FCS level who is, guess what, better than Florida International, Western Illinois, and probably Charlotte. Indiana's wins come against UCLA. Here's what I want to ask you about these wins and what they have in common. UCLA, Maryland, Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State, Michigan. What they all have in common is that none of those teams are good. None of those teams are these nationally ranked, bowl-bound, Indiana really proved it this week with their 14-point win against Maryland. Oh, did you see? They beat the brakes off Nebraska 56-7. Guess what? Guess what the craziest part of this whole deal is? Nebraska's not good at football. Oh, they really struggled at home against Washington, at home against Michigan. I get it, man. I do. Those teams did play in the national championship. Oh, and they suck this year. Excuse my language, BYU fans. Why are the Cougars behind Indiana? When every major metric would tell you BYU is the better football team. Indiana keeps winning home games against bad teams. BYU is winning a rivalry game on the road against the number 6 overall defensive efficiency rated team in the country. Oh. Yeah, is Utah records good? No. Are there analytics? Yes. BYU goes on the road and beats SMU. BYU beats the brakes off of top 25 Kansas State. But nope, Indiana's in front of them. Explain it to me. I don't even like Tennessee being at 7 and Notre Dame at 8. Give me some separation there between BYU and a team that lost to Arkansas and a team that lost to Northern Illinois. And it's not just a BYU thing here. Why is Colorado at 17? Can someone explain to me why Colorado is below A&M, who most recently has gotten their doors blown off by South Carolina? Why is Colorado below Kansas State, who just lost to Houston? I get it, but I understand. Colorado lost earlier this year in a close game to Kansas State. If they played today, I believe Colorado likely wins that game. Now, Kansas State at 16 is also absurd. It just shows that if Kansas State wins out, that it's pretty easy to move up 5 spots and be at the top 11 and be in the conversation for an at-large bid. And Colorado has that exact same deal. Think about this. Drake's on a heater. I just want to throw out before I get into positive mode and talk about my conspiracy theories. Where is Arizona State? 7-2 Arizona State. We're going to put them below Tulane. Okay. South Carolina. Okay. We're just not going to rank 7-2 Arizona State. Interesting. Stupid actually is the word that I would use. Sorry. Am I being vulgar today? Stupid is the word that I would use for it. Here's the good news. Kansas State 7-2. Yep. Colorado 7-2. They don't meet the rest of the way. Iowa State is out of the rankings. There's a world in which Kansas State goes 10-2. And I'm telling you, moving up from 16 to 11 in that span is not that crazy, okay? It's not insane to think Kansas State could finish 10-2 and be around that 11 spot with SMU in front of them, who could lose the ACC championship, A&M in front of them, who will inevitably lose to Texas, Georgia and Ole Miss in front of them, who both have multiple losses already, and I will not be shocked when one of them loses another game down the stretch. Alabama has multiple losses. We're talking about multi-loss teams ahead of Kansas State and Colorado that will continue to lose, or if they don't, they still have multiple losses. What does that mean? Kansas State or Colorado could climb into that 11 range, and then in the perfect world for Brett Yormark, 10-2 Kansas State, 10-2 Colorado, 12-0 BYU. Colorado goes to the college football playoff with a conference championship win. BYU fans, I know you hate that. It's what Brett Yormark wants, is more teams. Then at 10-2, Kansas State, who got to sit home and not go to the conference title, they're right there in that 11 spot. They're right there in that 10 spot. Chaos can ensue over the next 3 weeks, and as long as Kansas State wins the games ahead of it, they're very likely in the conversation at least. Why is Colorado behind them, though? Like, this should be a ranking of what have you done for me lately? What have you shown me in the last few weeks? If you're undefeated, you're certainly very high on this list. If you're winning games and playing your best football, playing at a high rate, you should be high on this list. That applies to plenty of schools in the top 15. Why doesn't it apply to Colorado? SMU is playing its best football. Boise State is playing its best football. Bama is playing better football. Ole Miss is playing better football. I get having those guys up there. Why doesn't Colorado get to reap that? Kansas State is not playing its best football. They're at 16. Colorado's at 17. You got it wrong. BYU at 6. They should be at 5. You got it wrong. I told you I'd be upset. I would be upset if BYU is any lower than 6. And even with them at 6, the fact that they're behind Indiana, I'm not happy. I wouldn't have been shocked if Tennessee was still above them at 5 and BYU was 6 and Indiana was at 7. But we've got to stop the false random narrative that somebody made up that Indiana is better than BYU or grades better than BYU, or that Indiana could somehow be in the same stratosphere, maybe stratosphere, as a Cougars team that has a much better resume. A Cougars team that's won every game ahead of it, same as Indiana, but the strength of schedule for BYU is so much better. I don't know, man. I don't know. Give me the Cougars in that head-to-head matchup. Indiana grades well, but give me the Cougars, who have the much better resume. And somehow the Big 12 has 2 teams within striking distance. I almost said the P word. Kissing distance, but take the K and make it a P. Within striking distance of the college football playoff. That is good. That is good. Coming up, who's the biggest threat to steal a big title? A big title away from BYU on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, today's show is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is where I go when I need tickets. Oh, the Avett brothers are playing on New Year's Eve, and Drake likes good music, so he wants to go see them at Bojangles in North Carolina. Maybe I will. It's within kissing distance, wink, of where I live in Savannah, Georgia. So I go to GameTime and say, GameTime, give me Avett brothers tickets, and GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a lower ticket somewhere else based on their lowest price guarantee. GameTime ticket coverage is the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. You get seat views, all-in pricing. Toggle that feature, shows you the all-in prices, no hidden fees at the end. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime picks. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Buddy, you best bet it is GameTime.
BYU's undefeated. Well, they're obviously the favorite in the Big 12, just by lieu of their record, of course. Who's challenging them? Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12, here to discuss that with me. I don't know, Drake. Nobody actually wants to win this league. I'm convinced BYU will lose at least one regular season game or at least the conference championship game. The magic has to end at some point, right? Wink, wink. Serious question. Who wants to win this league?
What?
Good answer.
Like for Big 12 fans, the first thing they'll think when they hear that is, did you not know about the Colorado Buffs who have only lost one game in conference, or the BYU Cougars who are undefeated in conference, or both teams that are on a winning streak and playing maybe Colorado their best football quite possibly, and for BYU they just have
easily.
this knack for winning games at the very end when they need to, or blowing people out like they did UCF or Kansas State. So if you think about nobody wanting to win the Big 12, I would say nobody outside of two teams wants to win the Big 12 right now. Kansas State slipping against Houston, Iowa State losing 2 straight. But all you need for the conference championship is 2 teams, BYU and Colorado. And both of those teams are on a crash course for the Big 12 championship game. So maybe nobody does want to win this conference if it was a 14-team league, sans those 2 teams. But guess what, Spencer? They still exist in this league, and unlike Utah, which has brought us down to 15 now, those 2 are here, and they're winning football games. And as long as that's the case, the Big 12's got the Buffs and the Cougars in a college football playoff matchup in Arlington where if BYU loses, you might get 2 teams in.
Yeah, I think that's the only scenario where you get 2 teams in. I think Colorado's schedule coming down the stretch with Utah not being any good and Kansas having a sub 500 record. Kansas still capable of going bowling, by the way, after their upset of Iowa State last week. Some people picked Utah and Kansas to make the Big 12 championship game. I don't know who those people are.
Joel Klatt. And you and I said Joel Klatt just may not know ball.
Yeah.
Preseason we said it also.
Exactly, which is why we are on this show and Joel Klatt obviously is not. So those 2 teams are on Colorado's schedule coming down the stretch. BYU has to go to Tempe and play Arizona State. I ask you right now, you have to place $50, probably with our friends at FanDuel, on one of those teams losing coming down the stretch. Who are you banking on?
Oh, man. The problem with BYU is they play so many of their 3 teams that are hot right now. I mean, Houston's playing its best football. TCU's playing its best football. Arizona State, the very same. That's where it gets a bit fuzzy. Now, is BYU at home on a night game this week? Yeah, no doubt. They're great in that scenario, but still, those 3 games are a gauntlet. And for Colorado, well, you've already mentioned, now all of a sudden the Buffs are not just a Big 12 contender, but a college football playoff contender. They have to keep winning. Both of these teams have to keep winning because of that Kansas State loss. The Wildcats are hoping the Buffs will lose. They drop into a tiebreaker scenario somehow, and there Kansas State sits waiting for the Big 12 championship. And Spencer, I think you would agree, if Kansas State wins the Big 12 championship, you might not be looking at a first-round bye. That 4 seed might go to Boise State. I mean, there's a legitimate scenario where the Big 12 gets really snubbed by a Kansas State or even a Colorado victory in the Big 12 championship. But to answer the question you asked, I do think because BYU seems like this team of wild destiny, Colorado might slip first, though I'm not very confident that BYU's schedule the rest of the way is that easy, though I do see Utah and Kansas both giving the Buffs at least a little trouble.
The great thing about this league is it's even more spectacular than we anticipated before the season. Before the year, we came in and said this is going to be the most competitive, this is going to be the deepest conference championship race in the country. Now, the SEC certainly has a case to be made here, but I don't feel like the bottom of the SEC can beat the top of the SEC. Vanderbilt is not the bottom of the SEC. South Carolina is not the bottom of the SEC. Those are just pretty good football teams over there. The bottom of the Big 12, Kansas or Utah, can beat the top of the Big 12. I mean, Utah all but had it in their grasps, and then they got a little bit too much of the grasp in the eyes of the official to keep the game alive and whatnot, but they could have beaten BYU over the weekend. So BYU, a short favorite at home this week against Kansas, yeah, of course they can lose that football game, but I have brought up before what you just alluded to, which is there is a realistic world where the Big 12 champion, if it isn't BYU, I think it's almost assured the Big 12 champion isn't going to get a first round bye. We'll see what happens in the college football playoff rankings that come out later today as this show airs. Well, but if it's not BYU, who's going to have a win that leapfrogs them ahead of Boise State?
I want to give BYU fans some solace here. If you lose the Big 12 championship game, you probably end up, if you're 12-1, with the 5 or 6 seed playing a home game. Provo, Utah, college football playoff, night game. That kind of rocks. If you're the coaching staff, you hate it. Give me the bye. If you're the fans, that's cool. And then the Kansas State or the Colorado, who's still sitting there, might be in the 9 or the 10 range playing a road game in the first round of the playoffs. We'll see how that pans out. But I do want to push back a bit here. We have seen...
Could you imagine, really quick, could you imagine? I don't think the playoff committee would do this, but we've never seen a 12-team playoff before.
True.
What if Kansas State, just as an example, beats BYU in the Big 12 championship game? BYU doesn't have the bye. Kansas State doesn't have the bye. Any chance that they get rematched in the college football playoff round 1?
That would be... No, there is no chance, but it'd be kind of funny.
That's what I thought, but then...
It'd be kind of funny, right?
It would be... I don't know, but there are a lot of things in college football that make me feel that way.
March Madness would never pit 2 in-conference teams against each other round 1, maybe round 2. I think the playoff would work the same way for football. Let me push back a bit, though, with your argument about the SEC. We saw Kentucky beat Ole Miss. We saw Ole Miss beat Georgia. Like the cream of the crop in the SEC right now.
Ole Miss lost to Georgia, but they pushed Georgia. Yes, that's a fair point.
Ole Miss beat Georgia.
Ole Miss. Sorry, I was thinking Kentucky. You're right.
So
I'm out of it.
Beat Ole Miss, and then Kentucky ends up being really, really bad at football, and then Ole Miss beats Georgia. So transitive property doesn't work in college football, right? Georgia struggles against Kentucky. They still win that game, okay? I'm not saying Kentucky's better, but we've seen bottom-tier teams, bottom of the conference in the SEC, Arkansas beating Tennessee. There is still parity in the SEC.
Arkansas is not a bottom feeder, though.
They're not very good at football right now. We just saw them get killed by Ole Miss. And again, Kentucky is that bad, and they lost to Georgia, but they beat Ole Miss.
Kentucky's a valid point. I will grant you that.
Who have we seen do that to Colorado? Who have we seen do that to BYU? Who have we seen do that to those two top-tier Big 12 teams? Nobody. And even Houston, I put in the category of Arkansas.
Utah just pushed BYU, and Baylor was a Hail Mary stop away from beating Colorado.
Pushed or won. Who won the games?
Utah pushed BYU.
Who won between Ole Miss and Kentucky? So we're talking top tier winning against the bottom tier, or vice versa. There you go. Oklahoma State pushed BYU. Who won the game? That's what it comes down to. That's what the committees, and they're going to talk about. Close game. They're going to say Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. We're not going to talk about Alabama struggled in the first half against USF for 3 quarters. Who won the game? And also Sagarin rating for whatever it's worth. Big 12 is the second best conference in the country. I don't know if that matters for anything, actually. And 12 of the Big 12 16 programs still in contention for the conference title. That's pretty cool, too.
That's the point that I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
The number of teams that feel like they can play at that level, I think it is higher. I think it's higher in the Big, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that's what makes the league so chaotically good. And
Mississippi State would get killed by but in the same vein, Oklahoma State would get killed by anybody at the top of the Big 12. It seems like right now, as they have in the past. I'll leave you with this too. We may have more time. I don't know. Half of the Big 12.
We have 60 seconds.
Half of the Big 12's games this year. 50 games in conference. 25 decided by 1 score. That's crazy. How do you do that?
By the way, here are the point spreads in the Big 12 this week. This is like NFL stuff. 1.5, 10. How about Colorado minus 10 against Utah? Goodness gracious. 1.5, 10, 3, 9, 9, 3.
That's awesome.
It's just phenomenal.
And Colorado has an average margin of victory of 17.2. Colorado margin of victory 17.2 in Big 12 play. The Buffs are hot right now.
The Buffs are indeed very hot right now. If I say, hey, you can put $50 down on one team to win the Big 12, not named BYU, who are you picking?
The Colorado Buffaloes. Deion Sanders,
goodness.
baby.
What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12. Appreciate it as always, Drake. Awkward outro in 3, 2, 1.
I had waffles for breakfast. Really quickly, before we talk about will BYU lose a game the rest of this year, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. I keep trying to tell you this. And right now you can go bet on BYU to win by 3 this weekend against Kansas. Or bet on Kansas to win the game. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place or in college football. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets, $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Download the FanDuel app today. Visit FanDuel. It is America's #1 sportsbook, and you can win money. FanDuel.com.
Drake, we've seen people talk about, and we've heard the College Football Playoff Committee talk about not punishing teams that go to a conference championship. How much do you buy that if you're not in the SEC or the Big Ten?
I need to buy it more when Kentucky can beat Ole Miss, okay, and then Ole Miss can beat Georgia. There is a false narrative across the country that the Big 12 is the only league that's eating itself alive. We have an undefeated team in BYU, and we have Colorado who's playing at the top of college football right now. Sure, the rest of the conference might be cannibalizing itself, but there are still elite teams at the top of this league that are winning at a high rate. The SEC has seen that to an extent, but they don't have any undefeated teams left. You go over to the Big Ten, and they've got Oregon, but past that, teams are losing over there. I mean, we still have an undefeated representative, and BYU fans don't want to hear this, but if you're Brett Yormark, you're begging the Cougars to lose the conference championship game. Why? That's the only way the Big 12 gets 2 college football playoff teams in. So if Colorado plays in the Big 12 title, they win. They finish 11-2. BYU finishes 12-1, 11-2. That's 2 teams in, one the conference champion, the other an at-large bid. Though if BYU wins in Arlington, Colorado's at 3 losses, you're only getting 1 team in. So while we talk about how do you value the conference championship, and if you lose, do you get docked? That will be the case if BYU wins the whole thing.
Yeah. What I think is going to be that interesting litmus test for the committee is they're saying all the right things, but when the rubber really meets the road, right, and then they start to play with these games of, oh, well, who did they beat and what happened here? Yeah. And that's going to be tough for them if SMU wins, right? If BYU has a win. But, man, when we get down to it, if it's Alabama sitting there at 10-2, or if it's Georgia sitting there at 10-2, and you've got a 12-1 non-conference champion BYU, I'm not telling you that I wouldn't take BYU. Again, look at the football over my shoulder. I am going to side with the non-SEC team here. Yeah. But I don't know that I trust the committee just yet. Now, again, I feel the same way over in the ACC. Now, I know Miami slipped up, but should Miami lose another one and be 11-2? With Cam Ward, a kind of a Heisman, I don't know that they get in over a 10-2 SEC team. And so, I do think now the Big Ten champion, or the loser of the Big Ten is going to be Ohio State or Oregon. The loser of the SEC is going to be a very highly ranked team. I would think they're in, but I'm not convinced that the committee is going to do the right thing with BYU, Miami, SMU, whoever that ends up being. But I guess we'll see. What do you think about BYU? They have flirted with just absolute death the last couple of weeks, or the last several. They've played down, I feel like, at times, or maybe they're just finding ways to win games. I'm not trying to dog BYU at this point, but man, at home they're a 3-point favorite against Kansas, and Kansas, we've talked about, is playing really good ball right now that they weren't playing earlier. But essentially, just saying that the undefeated Big 12 leader right now is a coin flip on a neutral field against Kansas. What are your thoughts on BYU right now?
Yeah, just to tie up the College Football Playoff Committee point you make there, TJ, Tennessee at 8-1 with a loss to Arkansas, ranked above BYU. Now, would Tennessee win a head-to-head matchup? I guess that's the case the committee is making. You see Notre Dame right there behind them. Indiana, who has not played a single bowl team yet, is still ranked above BYU. So we see the College Football Playoff Committee doesn't love the Cougars as much as many people do. And granted, you alluded to it. It's a phrase that many BYU fans and pundits are using now. Team of Destiny. They were analytically double-digit favorites against Utah, analytically double-digit favorites against Oklahoma State. They struggled mightily in those 2 games, and I wouldn't say that BYU is playing its best football right now. 2 of their last 3 have been shaky wins, that UCF game being the only one that's an outlier out of those 3. And now going into this week, they are projected to win this game per College Football Insiders and the analytics. 36-23. That's a 13-point win where they're only favored by Vegas standards by 3. And I'm still waiting for the perfect game from BYU. You could argue Kansas State was that game, but that middle 8 is where the Cougars actually won and dominated. I'm waiting for the entire ball game, our entire 60 minutes, to say, all right, BYU didn't just stomp a team, but they controlled the game. And there is that side of the Cougars. They've got it in them, no doubt. that is possibly the one bright spot is, hey, BYU's got 3 weeks now before the postseason to put it all together. I'm buying BYU right now, despite them underperforming where they should be from an efficiency standpoint. They're still winning games. It is the team of destiny. They've had 2 game-winning drives that were miraculous in the last couple of weeks, and with that, it's tough to pick against the Cougars when they just keep doing that winning thing.
Yeah, no matter how we pick apart or analyze or say this was ugly or, what winning is winning, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
And that's, unfortunately, that's some of what is maybe the issue with the committee. The BCS couldn't tell when an ugly game happened. Now, if you were a 30-point favorite and you won by 3, like it could measure that, but it couldn't tell like where you played ugly and won unimpressively or with a late comeback. And so, we've removed the importance of winning somewhat with our committees. Thoughts on how they match up this weekend against Kansas?
Yeah, I'm excited to watch this Kansas team. Honestly, TJ, they are playing at a very high level. You just saw it with their home win against Iowa State, where they specifically dominated the first half. And here's where things are going to get very dicey for BYU. Kansas is 6th in the country offensively on 3rd and 4th down. BYU defensively 74th. For some reason, as good as this BYU defense is, they seem to fall apart on late downs. If that happens in Provo this weekend, Kansas is going to have a shot, and BYU might have to come up with some magic toward the end of the game as well. And we've seen the Kansas offense play at a much higher rate over the course of the last couple of weeks. For BYU, the defense is going to have to step up once again and go win this game. The biggest thing that BYU has going for it, though, is that home crowd. Lavelle Edwards Stadium, they call them the Vampire Cougs. When they're at home playing a night game, it's a different level of BYU football. Even that Oklahoma State game, while they didn't dominate it, you saw late game magic that came from that home crowd being behind them. This will once again be a raucous environment, especially as good as Kansas has been the last couple of weeks. Gives the fans even more to root for, and BYU is an undefeated top 10 team. We've already heard murmurs of 1984 thrown back out there by fans that mostly weren't alive or don't remember 1984. They're excited to run that year back, their national championship campaign, and that alone, the home crowd alone, is going to give BYU a huge boost in this one. I think they win. I think they cover, but I see it being a 7 or 10 point game for the Cougars.
Yeah, they've kind of been what you mentioned, them kind of skating by teams and dramatic comebacks. Even the UCF game I thought was really, really entertaining. They've kind of been must-watch TV. And there's a lot of good stories in the Big 12. I think about Coach Prime. I think about BYU. We'll talk about Dillingham out there in Arizona State. There's a lot of really good stories, and but BYU is certainly top of one of the better stories in all of college football. So,
all right, that's all. I thought I would throw those 2 interview segments in there because they are #good, and I get to give. So when someone asks me questions, sometimes I can give my thoughts a little more, fluid, some more fluid thoughts. So that's what I wanted to do. Come back tomorrow for the squad show tomorrow night and our best bets of the week. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose grande.